Welcome into the Midweek Mailbag Show presented to you by Fantasy Points. My name is Nick Skrip, and every week on this show, I take questions from our Fantasy Points subscribers Discord and also from Twitter and answer them on this show. We're heading into Week 8, so you might have a sense of where you are in your fantasy football league, but there's plenty of football left to go. So we have some good questions here that I feel like are important for people to hear for their specific leagues. And I have two to start things off from Twitter and then the rest from the Fantasy Points Discord. So let's kick things off with the first question here at DuBois_22. Reaction to the James Robinson deal. How do we feel about ETN and Robinson moving forward? Who do you project for more points? So the Jets surprisingly sent over a 6th-round draft pick for James Robinson to the Jaguars to fill a need in response to that terrible Breece Hall ACL tear. James Robinson, 35 total games, 2,177 rushing yards, 89 receptions. Feels like a bit of a steal in the favor of the Jets, only sending over a 6th-round pick for a guy that's been pretty good in the games that he's been healthy. Even coming back from that Achilles tear, he opened up this season with 66, 64, and 100 rushing yards in the first 3 games and scored in each of them. Michael Carter opened up the season as the lead back for the Jets, seeing 60% of the snaps the first 2 games, but then that shifted over weeks 3 to 6 as Breece Hall's role grew in that offense. In all honesty, I've seen a lot of people's reactions being that Michael Carter will have slightly more work and be the lead back in this backfield now that James Robinson is there in this committee. But I feel like Michael Carter's profile is more of a complimentary back. I feel like he can get in on the passing downs, and he has that ability. I think he can change the pace up a bit, but I don't see Michael Carter is a workhorse, and I don't see him really as a lead back, in all honesty. And I think we kind of seen that with the Jets. They had Breece Hall. I'm never going to compare James Robinson to Breece Hall, but I think James Robinson is more of that early down running back in comparison to Michael Carter. So I think both guys will be on the field a ton. I'm sure it's going to be a committee, but I would not be more surprised. I would not be surprised if James Robinson is the more valuable running back in this backfield. And it might be that same sort of thing where it looks like it's Michael Carter getting more of the work the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And then as the season progresses on, James Robinson is starting to eat up more of that role. In general, though, this whole situation to me screams that it's Travis Etienne season. We've seen the progression of his role this season trending up. 71, 86, and 114 rushing yards the last 3 games. He saw 80% of the snaps and scored a touchdown in week 7, finishing with the season high 17.9 fantasy points. So RB13 the last 3 games. When we're looking at Travis Etienne, he's had 3 games of 3 games of 3 catches. So if that category changes and has, he has a bump there, his PPR value goes up. And we know that he has a history at Clemson, his college profile of passing work from Trevor Lawrence, who was his college and his current NFL quarterback. So I think there's a true case here now that James Robinson's out of the picture for ETN to be a top 12 running back the rest of the season. We've seen the progression of his role. We've seen him be better and better on the ground, and we know that he can be even better through the air. So again, a little bit of a committee. James Robinson, Michael Carter, Travis Etienne. It's a big push for his stock to go up the rest of the season. Another Twitter question here at Anthony Fantasy 2. Who is a good stash to have right now that will pay off the second half of the season? So maybe somebody that's not going to be in your lineups this week, but as the season goes on, will have bigger value, I believe he is asking. So running backs always come to mind, the handcuffs of the world that, you could beat the waiver wire rush on if you have one of those handcuffs in the starter, knock on wood. Nobody else gets injured, but let's say the starter gets hurt. Now you stashed a handcuff running back, and you beat the waiver wire rush for that guy. Rachaad White to me comes to mind when it comes to that. Right now, he's more of a complement running back who's had a bit of a growing role in Tampa Bay. But if something were to happen to Leonard Fournette, we know that Rachaad White's stock would skyrocket. So that, the those sort of running backs always come to mind, but I'm going to bring up a wide receiver. Jameson Williams, Detroit Lions wide receiver, the rookie. As of Tuesday on ESPN, redraft leagues, he's only rostered in 22% of leagues. So he's pretty much widely out there right now. Recovering from an ACL tear from the college football playoffs in January. Dan Campbell had recently said, though, about Jameson that he's turning a corner and he's optimistic for him. Believes he will play this season. Tears are all different at the end of the day when it comes to the ACL or any sort of big injury. But seeing a guy like Chris Godwin come back in week 4 when he tore it in somewhat of a similar timeline to Jameson Williams is pretty encouraging to me. We've seen some other guys come back for the wide receiver position and not have these lengthy recoveries that maybe we see more so with the running backs. But when it comes to Jameson Williams, they took this guy number 12 overall in the 2022 NFL draft. They were super excited about it. I saw the videos of them drafting him. He had the 5th most receiving yards for college football in 2021. He tied for 3rd in receiving touchdowns. Explosive downfield threat. Big playmaker with the ball in his hands. He just screams upside for fantasy football. So we saw last season how rookies like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Elijah Moore exploded in the second half of the season. Amon-Ra St. Brown was huge for many teams in the fantasy playoffs. So this kind of gets me thinking, like, what if Jameson Williams is that guy now? He gradually comes back in the second half, and then come fantasy playoffs, now he's a big factor just because that upside that he brings might be able to kind of come out. So he's a guy that comes to mind if you have the ability to throw him on your IR or just leave him at the edge of your bench. I like Jameson Williams, what he could bring for fantasy. Hopefully in the second half of this season, but if not, I think next year he has a big change in his valuation. So we'll shift over to the Discord questions here. This one is MFELVUS, who says, I need to upgrade at wide receiver. Who should I trade for with the following running backs? Najee Harris, Brian Robinson, Ramondre Stevenson, Travis Etienne, Ken Walker. So I talked about Travis Etienne already, and he's somebody I would personally want to roll with the rest of the season. Ken Walker looks like a workhorse right now, 21 and 23 carries the last 2 games, scored 4 touchdowns across the last 3 games. RB3 the last 2 games, averaging 23.9 fantasy points. Him and Etienne, I feel like I'd want to roll with the rest of the season. Damian Harris returned in week 7, but Ramondre Stevenson still played in 77% of the snaps and had 19 touches, 8 of them being receptions, which is huge for PPR. He scored 19 plus the last 3 games. Harris will factor in. Maybe he wasn't 100% healthy, but Stevenson was already beating him in snap percentage throughout the last handful of weeks when they were both on the field. There's a lot of name value, I feel like, attached to Najee Harris still, especially seeing his fantasy finish as a rookie last season. If you're looking for, 10 to 12 points weekly, then maybe you keep Najee Harris, but otherwise, he's pretty disappointing right now in terms of where you drafted him in redraft versus what he's producing. 13.9 fantasy points in week 2 was his season high. I still feel like, the return for Najee Harris, even though he hasn't been great, because of that name value, could be a pretty good wide receiver. So I think he might have enough of that name value to you still being able to flip him if you threw him on the block. Brian Robinson, I would not mind moving either. 12 and 10.6 fantasy points the last 2 games. 17 to 22 touches, so that's pretty good the last 2 weeks. He's getting the work, but still playing under 50% of the snaps with Antonio Gibson a factor. Antonio Gibson was more efficient in week 7 than Brian Robinson was. J.D. McKissick, he's trending down. He's still there, but trending down. So I'd say hold Etienne and Walker and Ramondre, sell Najee and Brian Robinson if you have that depth like this guy does and really need a wide receiver. Next question, Hillmatic. Is Greg Ducce a must-grab or hold if you drafted Kyle Pitts? How soon should we be starting Dulcich over Pitts? It's a great question. So Greg Dulcich, I had this tweet that it came back to and, quote tweeted in not a victory lap fashion, but I was like, hey, I said this was a possibility and it came to reality. It was, I mentioned that Dulcich was a tight end that could end up being the tight end 1 on his team. He was drafted in the 3rd round by the current staff, Albert O, was drafted by a former coaching staff in the 4th round. So where everybody was all into Albert O's season, I never really was, in all honesty. So it wasn't shocking that Dulcich pushed Albert O out of his role. 2 NFL games under his belt right now. He scored a big touchdown in week 6. Then he caught 6 of 9 targets in week 7. Tight end 7 across the last 2 games played. That's a really good sign there, showing that, hey, he can find the end zone, and hey, let's give him even more work the next week. Kyle Pitts, on the other hand, season high of 13.7 fantasy points in week 3. It's strange, but he scored exactly 3.9 fantasy points in weeks 1, 2, and 7. Wild. Targets are low, and a lot of that has to do with the way that the Atlanta Falcons offense is operating right now. 27 total passing attempts from Marcus Mariota across the last 2 games combined. That's horrible. It's horrible for the pass catchers. Week 5, he had 25 attempts. Week 4, he had 19. Week 3, 20. There's no volume there right now. Even when they should be passing the ball, they're not. Until there's some sort of change, it's tough to play Kyle Pitts, I feel like, right now. They're not throwing the ball. The focus is on the run. If Arthur Smith, the head coach, gets fired, maybe then we could say, hey, maybe the tides are changing. Maybe there will be a shift in the way that this offense operates. But until anything changes, I don't blame you for rolling with a guy like Greg Dulcich just because he's showing good signs, whereas Kyle Pitts is showing the same signs on a weekly basis. So I don't blame somebody saying, hey, this guy just got 9 targets last week. I'm going to start him over Pitts, who has seen 8 across the last 2 games combined. So, I'm a huge Kyle Pitts truther. Love him in Dynasty. I think his ability is 1,000% there. It's just the way the offense is operating. So if you do have a better option that's seeing some volume, which he's not, I don't mind pivoting. I don't mind pivoting until something changes. Then the last question here for this through Discord, Helen Eckler. In Superflex redraft, rank these stash quarterbacks: Willis, Ritter, and Howell. Which is most likely to start the soonest, and any of them actually have high-end QB2 potential? So just to spit out some facts here about this quarterback group, they're all rookies. Malik Willis is on the 4-2 Titans, who was drafted in the 3rd round. Ryan Tannehill is the current starter. Desmond Ritter is on the Falcons. They're 3-4, drafted in the 3rd round. Marcus Mariota, who we just talked about, is the current starter. Sam Howell is on the 3-4 Commanders. Taylor Heineke is the current starter with Carson Wentz on IR. Looking at this group here, if the Titans continue winning games, I doubt Tannehill gets benched. It probably wouldn't make sense if they're winning to bench their quarterback that they've been rolling with this season, and that's taking them to the playoffs before. I can see the Falcons giving Ritter the last few weeks, and I'm sure their long-term goal, plans are not that Marcus Mariota is going to be their long-term quarterback. But we're looking at an offense that we just mentioned that there's not a ton of volume right there. They're being kind of coached in a strange way. Maybe they just roll with Mariota. I can see them trying to feel out Ritter to say, hey, is this our guy next year, or do we need to draft another quarterback in this class? Sam Howell, I liked the most personally from this group. If Heineke struggles, Rivera is probably coaching for his livelihood, his job right now, and I can see him pivoting if Carson Wentz is still out and Heineke is just having an awful day. So I actually can see that happening where, again, Carson Wentz is on the IR, Heineke's having a bad day, and Rivera's like, hey, I got to do something here because, again, my job might be on the line. So I'd say upside-wise, Malik Willis. We've seen him in preseason, the dual threat ability, super athletic quarterback that can use his legs. He's got a plus arm. He's got to do a lot more developing as a passer. But I think upside for fantasy football, Malik Willis comes to mind when it comes to this entire group here. So he's got the upside. I'd say Sam Howell, I might predict to be the first one out of this group to actually get in the mix. But, looking at guys like Jared Goff, Daniel Jones, Jimmy Garoppolo, Justin Fields, Jameis Winston, I might just try to make some sort of deal to go and grab one of those guys in redraft, because I don't think that they're going to cost you an arm and a leg. Maybe you got a ton of depth at I don't know, you got a couple tight ends and somebody really needs a tight end bad and they have too many quarterbacks, maybe you can go and grab Jimmy Garoppolo. I think I'd rather go that route of cheaper quarterback that has shown us that they've had some upside in different categories this season. I mean, all those guys there that I just mentioned. Jared Goff's had nice games. Daniel Jones is running the ball at times like Lamar Jackson. Jimmy Garoppolo just got CMC on top of guys that have a bunch of yards after the catch. Justin Fields, I think, is QB4 across the last 3 games. Jameis Winston, when he returns in that system, gets healthy, could be a good play. So I don't think I'd really like bank on any of those guys, in all honesty. I think I just try to focus on obtaining a cheaper quarterback that has done good things this season versus like, hey, I'm going to have this like diamond in the rough, a quarterback that was on my waivers. I don't really foresee that unless somebody gets hurt. And then you're just banking on an injury, which I don't really like to do, especially for the quarterback position. But that'll do it for the show today. Usually do about 4, 5, 6 questions. If you enjoyed this show and you want your question answered, make sure you are a subscriber to Fantasy Points. That community Discord is awesome. All the analysts from Fantasy Points are in there answering questions all the time, communicating different things, sharing content. So it's cool to get questions from the Discord. I feel like we're pretty connected as a staff with the people there. Or if you follow the Fantasy Points live page, the Fantasy Points media group page, we ask for questions on there all the time. And it'll be a show that happens once a week, every week through this entire fantasy football season. Hope you guys got something out of this show here today, and good luck in week 8.